a true, and it's an old-fashioned word, but a true gentleman, as well as the country's most influential deputy minister.
Arthur Kroeger represents to me an Albertan who rose to the very, very top of the public service of Canada.
My parents came to Canada in 1926, having lived through revolution, civil war, and inflation in the south of Russia, and emigrated to eastern Alberta, where they really had a very difficult time in the early years. My father's health was very bad. There was no social safety net. There was no Medicare, no unemployment insurance, no old age pensions. Well, I went to a one-room country school for the first 8 years. And then in 1946, my family gave up the unequal struggle of trying to make a living off rather poor land and moved into the town of Consort. When I think back now, the most difficult move I ever made was 12 miles from the farm that I was raised on to a town of 250.
He worked in his brother's repair shop. His fingernails were not always clean. His aspiration was to become a mechanic in that shop. And I had been told that he was not a good student. That was correct.
When I was in my teens, along with all my friends in Consort, the way we spent our time mostly was we shot pool, we played hockey, we loafed around.
I did have a suspicion that he had much more than the school was using and much more than he was using. So I gave him an individual Wexler Bellevue test of mental abilities, and was surprised, almost shocked at the result.
Well, the environment in a small eastern Alberta town was one in which maybe you would go to a technical college in Calgary and take a welding course. Maybe you would go to Olds Agricultural College. Going to university was scarcely on anybody's radar screen. Hardly anybody did it. University of Alberta was possibly the most important single institution in my life, certainly my early life. Gave me an interest in intellectual subjects, gave me an interest in public policy, gave me an interest in literature. It really contributed enormously to my personal growth. I've always regarded it, after all these years, it is still, quote, my, unquote, university.
He's a good example of somebody who went from technical issue to technical issue and all the time drawing on these fundamental skills of writing, expression, persuasion, synthetic thinking, problem solving. Classic liberal arts person who got into a career that you might not have expected and did outstanding, just absolutely outstanding.
Well, I'm glad I took a training in literature before I went into government. There's more to government than political science and economics, and you need a more broadly stocked mind than that if you're going to really enjoy life. One of the things which was very useful in later life, in government, your stock in trade is words. And the ability to use words, the ability to express ideas, is fundamental to your functioning in government. And I've found that the ability to write that I acquired at the University of Alberta has just year after year stood me in enormously good stead.
And when I introduced him to a gathering once, I introduced him as somebody who had been a deputy minister of 6 different Canadian federal government departments. I mean, that's awesome. Some might have had 2 or 3, but Arthur had 6.
Of course, he was very involved in transportation reform, which was one of the toughest nuts for a government ever to crack. I mean, the old Crow rate. He's much too professional to tell you what his role in that was, but everybody guesses that it was because of his skill and persuasiveness that brought around Jean-Luc Pépin in the first place, I guess, was a minister at the time, and then the government, and of course we've had freight rate reform as a consequence of that.
He was charged with working out the constitutional conferences, which was very diverse groups of people, and he organized these conferences a number of years ago, but he was the one that really basically ran it. And as a result of that, there wasn't anybody at the very end of it that didn't have a high regard for him, because he was fair between all of the competing points of view and differing interests.
In 1993, I was invited to become chancellor of Carleton University, which I sometimes refer to as Henry Marshall Torrey's other university. Convocation is a really joyful occasion. The professors are relieved, the parents are proud, the students are pleased. The atmosphere of convocation is like nothing I've ever experienced.
One of the things I remember most or best is the one rainy, stormy, blistering, rainy night, muddy roads. He came to our place, we lived in a small community near Lethbridge, to say thanks. For a teacher, you know, that's got to be the most memorable experience you can have.
In his fundamental outlook on life and the way he comes across to the world, he is basically a humanist in a very real sense, a very educated man, a very thoughtful person, a person whose life is obviously driven by strong values and values associated with, in his own words, growing up in rural Alberta.
The ability was always there, the integrity was always there. And so that's the boy I met, and I'm glad I met the man he became. I wish I'd had, you know, half a dozen students like Arthur, but not in the same school, not in the same class. It would have been too much, I think.